Christy, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Fairy Dance, Fairy Garden, and Fishin' Hole. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers. I'll start with my fairy's skin, and I'm going to use E00, E11, and E13. So I'm starting with that E13 and laying in some shadows up under their hairlines, on the top of their arm where the sleeve is kind of hanging down, and also up under the skirt where that would be casting a shadow. Then I'll blend that out with the E11 and use the E00 for the highlights. And I will do the same for the second fairy. I wanted them to look like they could be sisters maybe, since they have similar haircut and similar outfits. Maybe they're even twins. So I colored their skin both the same. And I even did my shadows in the same places, since even though the second fairy, her body is kind of twisted a bit more toward the left, her head is twisted toward the right. So the shadows would just fall in the same places. And then I'm going to give them some rosy cheeks using R20 and R22. It's a little bit bolder than I usually go, but this is going to be a nighttime scene, so I just wanted that to be a little bit more vibrant. Moving on to their hair next, and I'm going to use the E50s. I really love the E50s for hair because you can really run the whole range from doing a super light blonde to a medium brown to a super dark brown, just depending on which of the E50s you use and how much of each one you use. So these are actually going to be kind of like a medium brunette. But I like to start with my lightest shade for hair and kind of map out where the darkest colors are going to fall in the end. So I'm placing those darkest shades, or the shadows that will eventually be the darkest shades, at the crown of the head and also at the tips of the hair, so that the parts that are kind of like floofed out are going to be the most highlighted, because that would be what would be catching the light the most. So I'm started with that E51, and I'm just working my way up from the lightest to the darkest. I'm on that E57 now. I'm actually going to skip the E59 for now and blend back out in the reverse. I do this a lot with hair. I like to save that darkest shade for just one quick final layer to add a bit of extra depth. But I don't want the hair to get too dark and those highlights to get lost. So I go to the shade before my darkest, and that's when I start going back down in the reverse. That's also where I kind of assess the hair and see if I want to add any extra streaks. You can see that I'm adding a few extra streaks to their bangs because I wanted to have a bit more low lights there. It was too wide of an area, too big of a chunk to have only highlighted for me. So I went back in with some of those darker shades. I mapped them out with the lighter shades once again first, and then I'm darkening them up. And then I'm going to do a quick pass with the lightest shade, the E51, to fill in any remaining white space. So there you could leave it, and it's kind of like a dirty blonde. But now is when I'm going to come in with that darkest shade, the E59, and just add one layer of those darkest streaks, just a few little flicks here and there, using the very tip of my marker so I can get really thin little lines. And then once I have that laid in, I will blend that back out with the E57, try to connect some of those lines or just come close to some of the lines coming up from the bottom or down from the top, so that they're just a little bit closer, so the highlights are more spread out between. So you can work back and forth as many times as you would like to and deepen up the shadows. You can't really make the highlights any lighter, but you can go darker. So just depending on the look that you're going for. I wanted to do kind of like a light honey brown for these two sweet little fairies. So that's what I did today. But like I said, with those E50s, you can do a lot. Next, I'm going to move on to the fairy's wings, and I'm going to use BG70 and BG10. So the BG10 is what I'm going to put closest to the body. It's a little bit more of a brighter shade. It's very soft. I often use it for glass, but the E70 is such a barely there shade. It just works beautifully with the BG10 for anything that you want to be kind of semi-transparent or transparent. So I love these two shades together for glasses, bottles, fairy wings, bug wings, anything like that. Because I did lay down a lot of ink there to blend out those wings, the paper was quite saturated, so I didn't want to color in their dresses and take the chance of anything bleeding into the wings. So I'm going to hop over to the cattails, and I'm going to color those with E43, E44, and E47. When I'm coloring items that are in an outdoor scene, I am always going to put my highlight up at the top because that is where the light source would be, either the sun or the moon. There's not going to actually be a moon in this nighttime scene. It will be kind of like out of the range of the scene that, we're cropped in on, but still it would be above. So that's why I put my highlights at the top. I'm going to do the same for my mushroom caps. I just lightened it slightly by taking away the E47 and adding in the E42. I started with the E44 down at the bottom edge of the caps. I also colored in the small spots on the smaller mushroom with that E44 and then blended out with the E43 and the E42. I'll also use these shades to color in a couple of rocks that I did not have room for on that stamped piece of cardstock, so I just did them on a scrap piece that I set off to the side. So I colored those in quickly as well. And then I'm going to lighten that combo even further for the stems of the mushroom. I took away the E44 and added in the E41. So I'll do the stems with that just to make them slightly lighter. And then I'm going to move on to my greenery. So I'm going to do two different shades of green just to mix it up since there is quite a few different areas that have leaves on them here. So G21, G24, and G28 is the darker of the two combos that I'll be using. And I will do the cattail grasses with that. Again, I put the G28 down at the bottom and I'm blending up toward the top. And then I will also use these same shades to do my lily pads. So because there are lines drawn in the center of the lily pad, that is where I put the G28, my darkest shade, just to emphasize those a bit. And then I'm blending out toward the edges with the G24 and the G21. And then I'm going to switch green combos to a slightly lighter and brighter combo just to mix it up. And that will be YG11, YG13, and YG17. For the very thin little stems, I'm just using the YG17 because it's such a thin little area. And you do really have to hold your marker straight up and down so you can get in that little area without going outside of the lines. As long as you do that, it's not too difficult. But then once I have that laid in, I will blend out the leaves with the YG13 and then the YG11. And then I will do the second little flower cluster with the same combo. Since it's got the same style of flowers, those little bluebells or whatever bell-shaped flower you want them to be. Plus the other little flowers there. I don't know, they remind me kind of like of marigolds or something. I'm not going to color them like marigolds today. I'm going to use different shades, but that's kind of what they resemble to me, although there's plenty of different flowers that are in that shape. But anyway, I just love these images. I think they are so whimsical and fun, and for whatever reason, I just really get in the mood for fairy cards in the springtime. And I just really love these fairy images from Hello Bluebird. I love the size of them. I love that there is enough of an image there that you can really practice your hair coloring skills. And if you want to, you can do different patterns on their dresses. They're just so cute and fun. I love that we have multiple fairy sets, and I love to use them at this time of year. To try to keep the color palette simplified, I will also do that other leaf up in the top corner with the same shades. I just went in the reverse, so YG11 first, and then just a touch of the YG13, and then the YG17, and then I did the bodies of my dragonfly with just the lightest two shades. I'm going to move on now to my bluebells, and I'm going to use B21, B23, and B24 for those. Drawing some little lines in there to give them a bit of definition and just some extra personality, you know, give them something a little bit unique. So I'm doing that with my darkest shade, the B24. And then I'll start to blend that out and pull those lines out even further with the B23. I'll also add some color to the one that's just budding and not open quite yet. Then I'll bring in the B21 and start to blend that out even further. And that was when I realized that I was going to need a fourth shade, because I really wanted them to almost have like an ombre effect and be really light on the ends. So I brought in B00 for that, just a very pale shade that I think matches nicely with the intensity of the fairy wings. So we've got just some more little areas on the scene that are really pale and pastel in tone. So I am going to go back to my darkest shade, that B24, and just go back over the streaky lines that I drew, emphasize those a bit more since they got a little bit softened with the color. So just a touch of that, and then I'll move on to some purple shades. I'm going to use V01, V04, and V05 for those other little flowers on the bluebell cluster on the right. And I put the V05 closest to the stem, blend it out with the V04, and then use the V01 at the tips. And I did go back with a little extra of that V05 to just increase that saturation. And then I'm also going to use this combo on the fairies' dresses. And since they're right next to each other and it's pretty quick and easy to color these, I'm going to do them both at the same time so I don't have to keep switching back and forth between the markers. But again, I started with the V05, blended out with the V04. I'm going to bring in the V01 next, and again I wanted a fourth shade because I really wanted that soft pastel look. I wanted kind of like a combo of the more vibrant and then also super pastel tones in this scene. So I brought in V000 to highlight the fronts of their dresses and the tops of their skirts, and do the little lace collar of their dresses as well. And then I'm going to do the lilies, the water lilies, with these lighter shades. So I started with V000, added in a little V01, went so dark as the V04, and then just blended that back out. And then for the last little flower there, I'm going to use B60, B63, and B66. And this time I'm going to place the darkest shades on the outer edge of the petals and kind of do almost like a little scallop shape on each of the petals, just to give them something a little bit unique. So I started with the B66, blended out with the B63, used the B60 to soften that, and then left the center white. I also used the B60 and B63 for the dragonfly wings. And then I'll go back to my YG11 just to do the very center of that flower. And then I will trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I have got one piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock that measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and then I have another piece that's just a scrap, and I'm going to use the Hello Bluebird Pond Builder. I'm using 2 of the dies to cut out a section in the middle there. I'm using the grassy border and then also what is going to be the edge of the water, trimming that out in my die cutting machine, and then I am going to color all of these pieces with some Distress Oxide inks. So that is how that is going to look and sit on the card front. Before I do my ink blending, I do want to just take a pencil and kind of mark out where the line is of that water beginning, so I can figure out where that is going to be. It didn't come out quite dark enough. I wasn't sure if it would pick up on camera, so I just re-sketched that. And now I'm ready to begin my ink blending. The first ink pad I'm going to use is Shaded Lilac. I want to stamp my sentiment in the center, so that is going to be the area that I will leave the lightest. So I'm just creating a soft, kind of glowy center with that Shaded Lilac, and then I'm going to start darkening that up. The next shade that I'll use is Wilted Violet, and I'm going to bring that in from the top 3 sides. So I'm going to leave the bottom because that's going to be the water where I right below the pencil mark. So I added in the Wilted Violet, and then I'm going to darken that up even further using some Villainous Potion. And I want to make the edges like nice and bold so that it's very vibrant and has that nighttime sky feel. So I'm darkening up those edges, and then I'm going to start blending back out in the reverse. So I'm going to go back to my Wilted Violet next as my midtone, and then back to the Shaded Lilac in the center. And I'll just work back and forth between those colors until I like the way that it is looking and it's kind of smoothed out. I decided that the Villainous Potion wasn't quite dark enough, so I brought in some chipped sapphire. I think this also helps it look more like a nighttime sky with that dark blue edging to the top part. And once I've added that, I'll just blend back out in the reverse one more time to just smooth everything back together. Once I'm happy with how that's looking, I did want to add a little bit of distressing. I'm going to cover up the bottom because I don't want that to get wet with a paper towel. And then I will add some water first. I'm just spritzing that onto an acrylic block and then tapping that off the side until it is nice and splattered. I'll let that react with that Distress Oxide ink for a few seconds and then blot it up with that paper towel. I did get one large blob there that I didn't really love, so I'm just going back to my Shaded Lilac Distress Oxide blending tool, and I just put a little extra ink there. Then I'm going to do some extra distressing, and I decided to do the chipped sapphire, so I'm mixing that with the water that is left on my block, and then tapping that off the side with that thin paintbrush, just to create a more interesting sky. Then I can come in with the bottom of my scene. I'm turning my panel so I don't accidentally drag my hand in any of the splattered ink above. But I'm going to use some Salty Ocean first, and then bring in that chipped sapphire on the edges. So the edges will all match the whole way around. So I'm just going to keep blending that on and making sure I have enough ink on there to get the saturation level to where I want it. So it did take a few times of working back and forth. That's what's great about Distress Oxides, is that they're so easy to blend, especially on the right paper, like a Bristol Smooth that has that really smooth texture. And I decided not to splatter the water, just to keep it kind of looking smooth and placid like a lake would. So I'm going to move on to my grass, and I'm going to start with some mowed lawn. I'm kind of pouncing that on the panel instead of kind of dragging it across because I don't want to take the chance of bending any of those grasses. And then I'll bring in some pine needles to darken that up on the top edge. Just being really careful with how I place that ink down. And then I'll go back to the mowed lawn to blend that out. I am going to do some splatter detail on the grass. So I'm just going to use the darker shade, the pine needles, but first I'll do some plain water, and then I'll mix up the darker shade after I've blotted that up, and just do a little bit of that detail on there as well. Once that panel has dried, I will pop it in my MISTI so that I can stamp my sentiment. I'm using one from the Hello Bluebird birthday script stamp set and stamping that in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'm going to stamp it out twice to make sure it's nice and bold, especially on that dark background. And then I'll set that aside to dry. I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI in the meantime, and it is MFT Grapesicle cardstock, and I'm stamping in Lawn Fawn Juice Box ink. And I've taken another sentiment from the birthday script, and then the fairy and the flower cluster are from one of the fairy sets. They're from Fairy Garden. So now I'm ready to start assembling. I'm going to glue this focal panel to my card front. It's going to cover the entire card front because it is an A2 standard size card. And then I will take the grassy piece, and I've added some foam tape to the back of that, and I'm going to pop it up right over the border between those two ink blended sections, just making sure that it is on there nice and straight. I really love how that dimension really pushes the water and the sky both back a bit. And then I'm going to add my images mostly with foam tape. I will add just a couple images flat to the card, but I love that dimension. So I did cut down lots of little pieces of foam tape, even though it's kind of a pain in the butt to do it, but it's totally worth it for the results, in my opinion. So I am just peeling off those release papers, and I am using one of my Twiddler's Nook embellishment trays to collect all of those release papers until I'm ready to take that whole thing over to the trash. I do that a lot when I'm doing little bits of foam tape, and it's really helpful. So I'm placing this large cluster over on the right hand side. I just had to make sure that it would not cover up any part of my sentiment and also not extend past the edge of the card so that it will still fit in an envelope. And then I'm going to place the shorter one over on the left. And I'm not going to get it completely behind the grass, but that's okay. I'm going to have a few other images in front of those. So if they don't completely tuck behind the grass, it's going to be totally fine. You won't notice in the final card. And then I'm going to take one of the little fairies, and I'm going to have her sitting on the flower cluster on the left. I love how she just fits up there so perfectly. It's already looking so cute. I'm so excited. I laid out one of my cattails to kind of get an idea of how the scene was going to look, but I didn't attach it just yet. I want to finish up with these little leaves and flowers that are going to fill in the gaps between the top of the grass on the bottom of those large flower clusters. Make sure that everything is going to be able to be covered nicely. So I did do a couple extra of some of these little accessory images, just so that I would have enough to, really fill in the scene. I didn't end up using everything that I stamped and colored, but maybe I'll have to do another make a card with me using pre-colored images soon, because I ended up with a few leftovers. So now I'm going to add the cattails. I'm going to do one at the bottom left, and I'll do another one over on the bottom right. And I just added some foam tape behind those on the area where it would extend down into the water, and then liquid glue for the part that is on top of the grass. I added a stone in front of the cattails on the left, and then I saw the mushrooms in there and wanted to make sure that I added those before I forgot. So I just tucked that back behind the grass in front of the larger flower cluster. I put a lily pad in front of the cattails on the right, and then I wanted to figure out the placement of my fairy because I wanted her to be kind of hopping from lily pad to lily pad, and so I needed to figure out where I wanted her to go, and then I could tuck one of the lily pads under her feet. So the way that I came up with this idea was I was actually flipping through my Hello Bluebird die sets and trying to use one that maybe I hadn't used in quite a while. And then I came across this Pond Builder die set, which I bought because I absolutely loved, and I don't think I've ever used it, like not even once. And so I was like, okay, well, I have to use this. And then when I saw it kind of laying next to the fairy sets that I had used on a recent card, this idea just came to mind. And it kind of reminded me of that song Blue Bayou, which I love. I always thought it was by Linda Ronstadt, but apparently it was actually written and performed first by Roy Orbison. I've never heard his version of it, but I know that my grandma used to love him when she was a teenager. So I thought that was kind of like a cool detail. But yeah, this is like my little fairy Blue Bayou. So all that's left is my little dragonflies, and I did stamp out 3 of those. I colored them all exactly the same, and I'm just going to fill in some of the gaps in the scene and create a little bit more movement with them. And then I decided that I would like to add a little bit of extra sparkle to this scene, some extra shine. Whenever you're making fairy cards, it never hurts to have a little extra magical sparkle. So I grabbed some clear sequins and just did like a little sprinkle of those in 2 sizes, kind of starting at the top right and creating almost like a S shape across the card. I let those dry for about a minute, and then I filled in the centers with some Stardust stickles. And of course I could not stop there, so I added some of the Stardust stickles to the dragonfly wings, to the fairy wings, to my flowers here and there. I didn't cover them completely. The only thing I covered completely was the fairy wings because I wanted them to be extra sparkly. But everything else I just added a little bit here and there to give it a bit of extra shimmer. I have to say, I absolutely love how this card turned out. I don't know what it is about it. It just came out even better than how I envisioned it in my head, and so I'm really, really pleased with it, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it too. I'm going to lift that up to the camera so you can see all of the detail, catch some of that sparkle and shine, and of course give you another peek at the inside. This is one that's going to be hard for me to part with. I really, really love it. So if you liked it too, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button. You can leave me a comment down below. I would love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video. If you'd like to pick up any of these products for yourself, I will have everything linked for you in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.